The Italian Wine Podcast is the community-driven platform for Italian wine geeks around the world. Support the show by donating at ItalianWinepodcast.com. Donate €5 or more and we'll send you a copy of our latest book, My Italian Grape Geek Journal, absolutely free. To get your free copy of My Italian Grape Geek Journal, click Support Us at ItalianWinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods. Grazie mille.
Welcome to Masterclass US Market with me, Juliana Colangelo. This show has been designed to demystify the US market for Italian wineries through interviews with experts in sales and distribution, social media, communications, and so much more. We will quiz each of our esteemed guests at the end of each episode to solidify the lessons that we've learned. So sharpen your pencils, get out your notebooks, and join us each week to learn more about the US market. Hello, welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Scott to the Italian Wine Podcast. Scott Thomas has an extensive 20-year career in the wine industry with roles as a sommelier in distribution and sales and also education. He's the founder of Grappolo Wine School in Denver, which offers immersive wine travel, wine events, and structured courses, including Vin Italy International Academy Italian Wine Maestro certification. He is also the wine director at Restaurant Olivia, a pasta-focused concept with a very Italian-heavy wine list. In addition to being an Italian wine ambassador and an Italian wine educator, Scott is also a certified wine educator. Scott, it's so great to have you here today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we're going to dive in today's episode a little bit more about the Denver and the Colorado market for Italian wine and education specifically. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit more about how you became such a passionate Italian wine ambassador.
Well, I think with anyone in the wine business now, it's a long journey, but starting in restaurants and then learning just a little bit kind of cracked the door open to learn more. So that set me on a path of certifications and gobbling up whatever I could and tasting as much as I can. And fast forward to, years with distribution and sales with lots of exposure from all parts of Italy with various importers and producers, and then being able to travel there. But it really solidified when I moved to Italy in 2018, pursued a master's degree at a small university in Piedmont. It's the University of Gastronomic Sciences. It's a slow food university. And there I was able to go deeper and to go more into the culture of wine. And I felt like the more I was in sales, the further away from where I started from and why I got into wine in the first place. So I was able to kind of just hone in, be immersed for 2 years between Piedmont and Tuscany. And then when I came back, just keep pursuing that education. So then becoming an Italian wine ambassador, passing that in 2022. And now really my whole conversations about wine revolve around Italian wine and culture. And I love it. And consumers love it, industry. I just love sharing that passion.
Right. Amazing. Incredible story. So, Scott, today we're going to really lean into what's happening in Denver for Italian wine, since that's where you live and you have a few different lenses on that market as both an educator, but also as a sommelier. So some of our key takeaways for today's masterclass and, what we're excited to chat with you about. Number one, what's happening right now in Colorado for Italian wine? There seems to be some excitement in that market. Number two, when it comes to education around Italian wine, it's such a complex category. How do we think about education for consumers and trade and the differences and similarities in those two things? And then finally, what do you think is on the horizon and future for Italian wine in Colorado? So just to start, give us a broad picture overview. What's happening right now in the Italian wine category in Colorado and in Denver specifically, where you reside?
Yeah, well, I think Colorado is a pretty dynamic market. I think, we're not New York or San Francisco, but we are certainly a hip and happening market. We've got a large population growth of late, which has fueled many new restaurants, which has fueled, more people, which seems like interested in trying new varieties and kind of exploring outside of the norm. It's a market that is full of young people. I would also say that as well. But there are pockets and neighborhoods that are kind of old and historic that are, still consuming, let's say, California wines. But there's a great set happening and a movement towards, exploration of Italian wine, native grape varieties, new regions, new producers. Fortunately, here we have 110 distributors, if I'm not mistaken. So we can have access to as many varietals and producers as you can think of, all the main ones. But, there's a lot of really cool, interesting wines coming our way, which gives us many options, as a wine buyer, but also as an educator.
Wow.
And to the consumer, a lot of options to kind of explore through. The restaurant scene, we just had Michelin come last year. So we're one of 8 North American markets that has the Michelin guide now. So I feel like that's brought a lot of energy and enthusiasm to our restaurant scene, at least.
Very cool.
And, up until last year, really, we were a independent retail market. So large chains could only have one liquor license, or Costco's could only have one location, or Total Wine only one location per se. So which really allowed the small retailer, independent retailer to thrive. And I think of them as a lot like going into a restaurant and speaking to a sommelier. Is like these small retailers had the opportunity to engage the customers and to, talk about Italian wine in a really fun way, which really helped, I would say, fuel this passion kind of citywide in a way. So lots of things happening here.
On that point, how do you think the market might change now as that retail component changes with the chains?
I feel like we've already seen some pretty drastic changes in a lot of ways.
Okay.
One, if you're a novice, let's say a consumer, you shop only at a certain store, you're only going to see the same wines on that set, no matter which store you're going to, because let's say there's one regional buyer and they're making selections and they're the same across the board. So
right.
Unfortunately, there won't be many options in that particular set.
Mm-hmm.
We've also seen some retailers, small ones, that have gone out of business because of that. Those that were in close proximity to larger stores that now have liquor licenses that didn't in the past. But we've also seen, a resurgence of the small independent retailer, kind of approaching wine sales and engaging their customers in a really new way to strengthen their brands and to continue this, legacy, let's call it, of diverse wine selections on the shelf. I'm chatting with a lot of importers lately and distributors. It feels like they have been maybe a little bit more cautious and conservative with bringing on new products.
Okay.
Just because of the landscape right now has been so...
What do you think that is? Is that because now there's less independent stores, as you mentioned, some are closing, or for another reason?
I feel like that's the primary reason, and just the unpredictable, it's not predictable what's happening in 6 months from now, and to carry inventories or to launch a new brand or bring in a new producer, let's say, it may be more challenging for the small importer versus the national importer that signs a national deal and contract. But, we have many independent importers just for Colorado, and that's where we've seen somewhat of a conservative approach of late.
So do you think Colorado might move more in the direction of a market, I don't know, let's say like a Florida or Texas, that's dominated more by the chains as opposed to the more indie market that it was? Or do you think it'll be able to maintain, the independent market too?
I think it's going to be maintaining the independent market. That's my hope and goal. I really feel like it's moving in that direction, that we've maintained the stronghold of the independents while having a dual existence of the larger, stores in existence too.
Got it. Okay. So having kind of a dual pronged approach. Okay.
Right. And I think restaurants have a lot to do with that too. Restaurants create brands and drive brands, and those, if we're working with a small producer, let's say, hopefully guests are going to leave the restaurant and ask for it at their independent retailer, and they'll be able to bring it in there and continue that.
Right. Absolutely. That's a good broad picture overview, and helpful, I think, for our listeners to understand that what's happening right now in the chain space and in Colorado, and that how that might affect the market in the Italian category specifically. You also have a big role in Denver and as an educator with your wine school. So can you talk to us a little bit about the foundation of the wine school? Who are you serving? Who are your students? And just a little bit more about the structure.
Sure. It's Grappolo Wine School, which is the Italian word for grape bunch, right? Because it all starts with a grape. The formation of this came about while I was living in Italy, and my thesis for my master's was a comparison of education in wine regions, let's say. So I had a business plan. I was going to start a wine school in Alba. That didn't work out due to COVID. I was there during COVID time. But when I came back to Denver, it allowed me the space to kind of think about what was needed in that time. So I would say in-person education after COVID fell completely flat. There were very few options. So there was one, there was a need. And then two, it was something that I've always wanted to do and to share the love of wine, through interactions, through tastings, share my stories of my time there. And it's come about now in a sense that I don't have a physical space, but I have really amazing partners and restaurants and spaces that I'm able to use. And so I work directly with the two prongs, let's say, with industry and consumers both. On the industry side, staff trainings for restaurants, let's say. So kind of elevating the education of the people selling and guest facing on a daily basis. Distributors as well, and distributor representatives, and even importers. And then on the consumer side, I'm hired to come in and do an event, or also my public classes, also going that route as well, which has been quite successful in a lot of ways. So I literally feel like this market is quite thirsty for more education, and especially Italian wine education. And based on my experience with distributors, that reality that I was on when I was working with distributors, it always felt like, those who had the most knowledge, that if you're on the streets and you're dragging a bag, that if you had the most knowledge, you were probably going to be the distributor of choice or the rep of choice. And because you brought a certain level to your appointments, you know more about that wine than anybody else. And I still feel like that is a really great approach. So my whole foundation was just spread knowledge. If you would like to attend, I know you're going to walk away and learn something, and then that will make you better at your job in the end, hopefully.
Absolutely. And talk to us, since you're educating different audiences, what works the best when you're educating the trade when it comes to Italian wine, knowing just, distributors might have a book of thousands of SKUs, that they're selling. How do you teach them about Italian wine in a way that gives them enough information to really sell the category, but isn't daunting or overwhelming?
That's a great question. I think we start broad picture, the 20, political regions, let's say, geography. We're learning about what makes every region somewhat identifiable and unique in its own identity. So if we're talking about Valle d'Aosta, for instance, and we were talking about the very unique variety on the very northwest, which is Pré Blanc, and what significance it's had there and its historical significance. So I think providing anecdotes that people can walk away with and remember, whether it's the name of the grape, the entomology, the particular characteristics of that grape, that they will know no matter what. If you're pulling a Nebbiolo as a sample and you're showing it, that you should know that these classic characteristics should always come through, and that you always look for something that's perfumed, red fruited, maybe a little bit of tar, tobacco, things like that with age. And I kind of approach that almost by region and also by grape variety. So my approach is more of like focusing on the grape, and then you'd be able to make those associations with the regions thereafter, with the DOCs. And you would know that, Nebbiolo from Piedmont is much different from Lombardia than it is from Valle d'Aosta with tasting. I also feel like tasting side by side is one of the most powerful things you can do, and just be able to feel the difference and sense the differences and make those own comparisons on your own accord. And same with consumers. I think that's a really powerful way to learn, is to taste side by side. A couple examples.
Yeah, and when it comes to comparison tastings, what are your thoughts on bringing in other regions? So I know, for example, Sicily recently did a tasting at Taormina Gourmet last October, where they tasted the Contrada wines against some Crus from Burgundy. So what's your thought on that for education of tasting Italian wine side by side other regions?
I think that's also a powerful way to learn too. And I agree. It's like, tasting Italian Chardonnay next to something from Burgundy. You might see a similar thread, but you'll also be able to tell that it's from a different place. There's a lot of comparisons right now between Nerello Mascalese and Pinot Noir. And, not only on the color, but kind of the mouthfeel and the body, the texture. And I think that does resonate really loud, let's say, with both consumers and industry, because as someone who came up through wine through the French lens, and it feels like most everyone learned that first in a lot of ways, it's easier to make that comparison and draw that parallel between another Italian grape variety and to be able to like say, okay, well, this is red fruited, it's soft. Then you're starting to drill down to terroir at that point. If we're talking about contradas, specific zones and making comparisons between some of the cru or the villages of Burgundy. I've yet to do that, but that sounds like a really fun tasting personally.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Sign me up for sure. When it comes, Scott, to what's on the horizon in the Colorado market, thinking about varietals, regions. I know you mentioned Valdosta a couple of times, which is where some of my favorite Italian wines come from. But what are you seeing getting the trade specifically really excited about Italy at the moment?
I think there's a few things happening, frankly, and I feel like there's a resurgence of the classic regions. There's the new conversation happening in and around Chianti Classico with the introduction of the Ugas, the new categories, the Gran Selezione. So even if you've been in the industry for years, there's a new conversation that's happening, and a deeper conversation about, zonation and learning about the nuances of each zone, and using Chianti Classico as a great example as differences between Castelnuovo Berendenga versus, Rada, or, the higher altitude sites of Gaiole, and how they differ. And I think that's something that's really getting even folks that have been in the trade for a long time really kind of jazzed up again, and kind of reinventing what are regions that we've known and where they're going to, because there's a lot happening in Italy. And I think if you can make that, get everybody excited again, let's say, of certain classic regions, especially, will show a lot of, I would think, sales, more enthusiasm with the customers, guests in general. That's kind of what I see happening right now. Also, just the introduction of all the interesting grapes and learning about them. When's the last time you tasted a Galliopo from Calabria, and know that it's probably the offspring of Sangiovese, and drawing that connection, and that it's a sibling of Nerello Mascalese, and kind of drawing that line and seeing the similarities between the three. I mean, these are kind of conversations that I'm having kind of on a daily, weekly basis with industry and consumers alike.
Right.
And all eyes are on Italy right now. So many people are traveling there. I mean, it seems like it is the hotbed for European travel at this point in time. So it's really easy to open up that conversation on all fronts.
So you find that what's working well is getting more hyper specific within some of the classic regions like Tuscany with the Ugas, and really drilling down into the regional specifications. Like that level of knowledge and detail is resonating.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Very cool to hear.
And I see that in my Italian Wine Maestro course. I try to offer that, and then tasting comparisons between them, just so they can have a barometer of sorts. But it does resonate across the board, even with consumers, to go that specific. I mean, they've been doing it for years in Burgundy, and even in Bordeaux. I think Italy can have that same conversation and that same approach.
Very cool. Exciting.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, this has been a lot of fun. As we wind down, we always do our 3 rapid fire questions. So if you can do your best to answer these in just a couple sentences.
Okay.
Question number 1, what is your number 1 tip for mastering the U.S. wine market?
Ooh, I would say be prepared as a producer. Come with education, come with anecdotes and stories of your family or your place. And then try to transmit that knowledge, of course, through the channels. So from your importer to the distributor, all the way down to the decision makers. And then if you can get in front of the consumers and doing consumer events, and I think creating personal relationships with everyone at each of those tiers would get you a long way.
Relationships, absolutely. We know this is an industry of relationships.
Indeed.
Indeed, of course. Scott, what is something you might have told your younger professional self about working in the wine industry?
Ooh, I would have told myself,
Mm-hmm.
you should go travel early on.
Okay.
And travel with an open mind. Try to meet as many people and many producers as possible, and shake hands, and again create relationships early in your career. I don't think there's any better way to learn about wine than to being in the place in which you're studying.
Great advice. Absolutely. And finally, on that note about traveling, what is your favorite travel hack when you're doing market work?
Well, that's a great question. I always bring an extra suitcase. I bring a small suitcase inside of a larger suitcase so I can come back with regional specific wines that we can't find here, and or olive oil. I'm a junkie for olive oil because I think it's a similar conversation with wine when you're talking about the varieties. It's really fun to have an olive oil tasting at home and bringing your friends over.
Yeah.
And it's something that lasts a little bit longer than wine. It's not a pop the cork one and done. It's something you can enjoy over time. And it's also something you can see progress and change. So I always leave enough space in my luggage for things like that.
Olive oil. Great. Love it. Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you again, Scott, for being here with us on the Italian Wine Podcast. And how can our listeners connect and follow along with everything you're doing with Grappolo Wine School and in Denver?
I'm on Instagram. It's the handle is Grappolo Wine School. My personal Instagram is _Scott_Thomas_wino. And you can find me on socials, LinkedIn, things of that nature. Yeah. And if you're coming to Denver, please visit at Restaurant Olivia, and we'll taste a lot of cool things. That's for sure.
Okay. Amazing. Thanks again, Scott.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned each week for new episodes of Masterclass US Wine Market with me, Juliana Colangelo. And remember, if you enjoyed today's show, hit the like and follow buttons wherever you get your podcasts.